The forest stood still. Daniel and Sarah walked deeper, their boots crunching on fallen leaves. Their laughter echoed strangely, quickly swallowed by the oppressive stillness. They had come seeking adventure, a weekend escape from the city's clamor. The woods of Blackwood promised just that, a place whispered to hold ancient secrets. But beneath the surface beauty, an undercurrent of unease pulsed. The air grew colder with every step. The sunlight, feeble and weak, struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves. The woods seemed to watch them with an ancient, knowing presence. The adventure they sought was about to take a dark turn. As the sun began its descent, casting long, eerie shadows, the forest floor grew dark. They set up camp near a murmuring stream, its melody a jarring contrast to the otherwise unnerving silence. While Daniel gathered firewood, Sarah unpacked their supplies. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that mirrored the growing unease in her gut. A rustle in the undergrowth made her jump. She spun around, her eyes scanning the woods, but saw nothing. Just the wind, she whispered to herself, her voice thin and shaky. But deep down, she couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The woods were full of unseen eyes, their gaze cold and predatory. Daniel returned, his arms laden with firewood. He hummed a cheerful tune, oblivious to Sarah's mounting fear. He didn't notice the way her eyes darted around, her every sense on high alert. Nightfall descended, blanketing the woods in an impenetrable darkness. The crackling fire became their only solace, casting flickering shadows that danced on the surrounding trees. But beneath the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves, there was another sound. A high-pitched, almost inhuman shriek echoed through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. Daniel's cheerful facade finally cracked, replaced by a look of concern. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before Sarah could answer, another sound reached them. The snapping of twigs, slow and deliberate. They were not alone. The first rays of dawn pierced through the dense canopy, painting the forest floor in dappled light. The previous night's terror felt like a distant nightmare, a figment of their imaginations fueled by darkness and fear. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Birdsong filled the air, a cheerful counterpoint to the eerie silence that had cloaked the forest the night before. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, had dismissed the strange sounds as nocturnal animals. "Just foxes," he'd said, his voice calm and reassuring as he stoked the dying embers of their fire. Sarah, though still shaken, found herself clinging to his certainty. Surely he was right. This pristine wilderness, bathed in the soft, golden light of morning, couldn't possibly harbor the kind of darkness they had imagined. They spent the morning exploring, their laughter echoing through the trees. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows once more, the uneasy feeling returned. The forest, so welcoming just moments ago, began to feel oppressive, the air thick with an unseen tension. The cheerful chatter of birdsong faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. It started subtly, a rustle in the undergrowth that seemed too heavy for a squirrel, the snapping of a twig that seemed to come from just behind them, though when they turned, there was nothing there. Then Daniel spotted it, a footprint in the soft earth beside the trail. It was far too large, almost the size of a man's hand. The growl hung in the air, a palpable threat that sent shivers down their spines. They stopped, their breath catching in their throats, listening intently. But the forest held its breath too, the silence amplifying their fear. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch sounded like a footstep. The unseen eyes, they felt certain, were upon them, watching their every move. As they rounded a bend in the path, the trees thinned, opening into a small clearing. Sunlight streamed through the canopy, illuminating a scene that stopped them dead in their tracks. Standing in the middle of the clearing, its back to them, was a creature unlike anything they'd ever seen before. It was large, easily the size of a man, its back covered in thick white fur that seemed to glow in the sunlight. Its legs were long and powerful, ending in paws that looked far too large, too sharp for any ordinary rabbit. It moved with a strange, unsettling grace, its head lowered as if sniffing the air. Daniel and Sarah stood frozen, their breath trapped in their chests, their eyes wide with a terror that threatened to consume them. The creature, as if sensing their presence, slowly turned. The sight of the blood-stained knife snapped them out of their paralysis. The creature was no figment of their imaginations. It was real, and it was hunting them. "Run!" Daniel screamed, his voice hoarse with terror. He didn't need to tell Sarah twice. They turned and fled, crashing through the undergrowth, their backpacks snagging on branches, their lungs burning with exertion. The creature, with a guttural roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest, gave chase. They could hear it crashing through the undergrowth behind them, its heavy paws pounding the earth, its enraged growls echoing through the trees. They didn't dare look back. They ran blindly, their only thought to escape the nightmare that was closing in on them. They burst out of the trees and into a small clearing, gasping for breath, their legs burning, their chests tight. The clearing was empty, bathed in the soft light of the late afternoon sun. For a moment, they thought they had outrun it. They clung to each other, their bodies shaking, their hearts pounding against their ribs like trapped birds. The silence of the clearing was almost as unnerving as the sounds of the chase. "We need to get to higher ground," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. "Maybe we can find a road or a ranger station, something." Daniel nodded, his eyes darting around the clearing, searching for any landmark, any sign that could guide them. They set off again, their pace slower now, their bodies aching, their spirits battered. The forest seemed to close in around them once more, the trees pressing close, their branches intertwined overhead, blocking out the sun. The air grew colder, damper, the scent of pine needles replaced by the cloying sweetness of decay. They could hear the creature now, moving through the undergrowth just beyond their sight, its heavy breathing, its guttural growls, a constant reminder that they were being hunted. A glint of metal flashed between the trees, a flicker of red, The same unnatural crimson they had seen in the creature's eyes pulsed in the distance. Hope surged through them, fragile and easily extinguished, but hope nonetheless. "There!" Sarah cried, pointing to a rusty sign half hidden by overgrown vines. The paint was faded, the words barely legible, but it was enough. Civilization, or at least a sign that civilization existed somewhere beyond this nightmare. The sign pointed down a narrow, overgrown path, almost swallowed by the encroaching forest. 2 miles. It felt like 1,000. The path took a sharp turn, leading them down into a narrow ravine. The air grew colder, damper, the scent of decay heavy in the air. And then they saw it, a fallen tree, its trunk rotting and moss-covered, lay across the path, effectively blocking their way. They had reached a dead end. Despair threatened to engulf them. They were trapped. They heard it then, a low growl followed by the sound of heavy paws on dry leaves. It was close, too close. It moved with a terrifying grace, its red eyes burning with a cold, predatory hunger. It had them trapped. Panic surged through them, threatening to overwhelm their last vestiges of reason. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. They were going to die here in this cold, dark ravine, their bones left to bleach in the sun alongside the other unfortunate creatures the Wererabbit had claimed. But even in the face of such overwhelming terror, Daniel refused to give up. He looked around frantically, his eyes searching for anything, any way out of this nightmare. And then he saw it, a narrow crevice in the rock face, almost completely hidden by a tangle of vines and creepers. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. "This way," he shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand and pulling her towards the crevice. She didn't hesitate, didn't question him. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the knowledge that this was their last desperate gamble. They scrambled towards the crevice, their backpacks snagging on the undergrowth, the creature's enraged roars echoing behind them. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Daniel pushed Sarah through first, feeling her body brush against his, her fear a palpable presence in the close confines. He followed close behind, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum. They tumbled into the darkness, the sound of their own ragged breathing filling their ears. They had escaped for now, but the creature was still out there, and the forest held its breath, waiting. The crevice was narrow, cramped, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Daniel and Sarah huddled together, their breath echoing in the confined space. The darkness was absolute, pressing down on them, suffocating them. Sarah could feel Daniel's heart pounding against her back, mirroring her own terror. She wanted to scream, to release the fear, but she bit down on her lip. Any noise could alert the creature to their presence. The silence outside was the silence of a predator, waiting. Every rustle, every creak sent shivers down their spines. The air was heavy, thick with the musk of damp earth and something feral. Sarah could feel her fear mingling with the other smells, creating a metallic scent. They were trapped in a tomb of their own making, buried alive with their terror. Then, through the darkness, Sarah saw it, a faint glimmer of light like a distant star. "Daniel," she whispered urgently, "look." He squinted, eyes adjusting. "Light," she said, her gaze fixed. For the first time, Daniel felt hope. He squeezed Sarah's hand. "Come on. Let's see where it leads. They emerged from the crevice, blinking into the harsh light of dawn. The forest was still, the air heavy with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. They stood there for a moment, their bodies stiff and sore, their clothes torn and dirty. It was the silence of peace, of tranquility, of a world reborn. Daniel took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the crisp morning air. He looked at Sarah, her face still pale, her eyes wide with the memory of fear. They turned and walked away from the crevice, their steps slow but steady. A new dawn had broken.